Welcome to the Girlfriend God Podcast, a podcast in search of and in service to the divine feminine. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to follow it, rate it, review it, and share it with your friends. Now, together, let's find the divine. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Girlfriend God Podcast. Today, I'm really happy to welcome Falcon River, and Falcon is an ordained priestess, an ordained Dianic priestess of the Guardian Path, dedicated to a magical partnership model that collaborates with other ritual facilitators to ensure a safe and powerful ritual experience for participants. She has helped to create and support women's ritual circles since 1976, and she's passionately committed to teaching practical energy and magical skills for daily life. In 1999, Falcon co-founded the Temple of Diana with Ruth Barrett, where she taught on the core facility for the Spiral Door Women's Mystery School of Magic and Ritual Arts for 15 years. Falcon grew up in the Appalachian Mountains of southern West Virginia, climbing the trees and calling into every cave she could find. As a child, she was trained in traditional folk magic and medicine by her family elders. In her early 30s, Falcon studied and apprenticed intensively with Dr. Dawna Markova, the author of The Open Mind, a body of work dealing with perceptual learning modalities. Falcon also studied for several years with Linda Tellington-Jones and Robin Hood, learning the Tellington Touch team techniques for working with horses and other companion animals in their healing and training. For more than 30 years, Falcon was a professional body worker, healer, and clairvoyant working with animals and people. She's also a storyteller, a traditional archer who has brought Amazon archery to women's festivals and pagan gatherings for decades as a tool for empowerment. She continues to teach online, do healing work, leather crafting, and woodworking from her home with her wife, Ruth Barrett, in Michigan. Falcon has been teaching the Elder Futhrog runes for about 40 years, bringing a female-centered perspective to her students online and at festivals nationally. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. I decided to title this episode Womanizing the Runes.
Oh, right. Good.
And in the show notes for this episode, there's a little more about Falcon and the literature that she's been published in, and you can find all of that in the show notes. So,
My
welcome.
goodness. Wow.
I know it's a lot, right? Whenever somebody
Sounds
else
like
reads,
I'm busy.
right? Whenever somebody else reads my credits online, I'm like, I've done a lot. And you've
Really? Who did
done
all
three
that?
times as much as that.
Yeah, yeah.
So I
Mhm.
just want to say first that I was glad to read about your work with horses, and I don't know what the touch technique, I don't know what the teams thing is. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah. It is something that Linda uh, discovered and developed when she herself was working with uh, a brilliant man named Moshe Feldenkrais. And Feldenkrais is a system of healing and body work developed by Moshe Feldenkrais many, many years ago when he was injured. And it's a system of non-habitual exercises and movements that helps you re-educate your the neural pathways in your body to help you recover from um, traumatic injuries.
Hmm.
For myself, actually, I utilized what I learned from Linda and a little bit from studying Felden. I also, interestingly enough, also studied the Feldenkrais technique with Dawna Markova. She included that in her trainings. And
Hmm.
so I was able to use those techniques in healing myself from traumatic brain injury, which I got from a horse about 23 years ago. So it's a huge body of work and well beyond the scope of this session that we're doing to talk about. But I would encourage folks to look it up. It's an amazing body of work that can be applied not only to humans, but to all creatures. And especially, oddly enough, horses really respond well to it. So, yeah.
For a time, many years ago, I volunteered at a sanctuary here in Champaign with an organization called SHARE, which stood for the Society of Hooved Animal Rescue and Emergency.
Oh, yeah.
And me and a whole host of other volunteers. I mean, it's a huge farm. They've got like anywhere from 40 to 60 horses at any given time, and some of them have been abused and neglected. Some of them, the owners just couldn't afford to keep them anymore.
Yeah.
And it was a really, really magical experience to work with these horses and watch them grow and learn how to trust people and develop a feeling that they were safe in their environment. I mean, it was just remarkable.
Learn how to trust. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Humans don't deserve horses and dogs because
right.
we're not really trustworthy. So many
Right,
aren't.
right.
So yeah, we don't deserve them, I don't think. I'll just be honest with you. I much prefer the company of dogs and horses to the company of most people.
Hmm.
So anyhow,
I like my dog more than most people.
yep, yep.
So I think first I want to talk about, let's talk about the Futhrock runes, because there are several different, maybe not several, but there's more than one kind of runes, right?
There
So
are
let's talk
several
about that first.
runic writing systems. There's the Elder Futhark, which is simply named for the first few letters of the of the um, of the runic system.
Okay.
And there's also the Younger Futhark, which developed afterward. It's kind of my version. My thought about it is that the Younger Futhark is sort of like shorthand, shall we say. Most
Mhm.
people, I'm showing my age because most people wouldn't even know what shorthand is, but it's another uh, simplified system of writing. And
Right.
then there's and and the elder Futhark and the younger Futhark came out of the Scandinavian countries, Norway and Sweden. Um, and then there's the Anglo-Saxon Futhark, which is was primarily used by, hang on. And so the Anglo-Saxon Futhark was used by the Germanic people. And when I say Germanic, I don't mean just the people of the modern company of Germany. What I mean is the Germanic tribes, which actually stretched in from say Italy all the way across to Spain, Portugal, France. Those folks. I'm talking
I
about
think that's a common misconception when we say the word
yeah,
Germanic.
yeah. So, um, and then there are several other uh, runic systems as well. So, but because because there's so many, I chose for myself to focus on my own ancestral area of influence, I guess. Um,
Hmm.
so I've chose over the years to study the Elder Futhark primarily. I know a little
Hmm.
bit about the Elder Futhark, but I really have focused on the Elder
Hmm. Um, Timeline speaking, in the history of the world, uh,
Futhark.
when did when do we think the first uh Elder Futhark runes were discovered or created?
Well, so there is some thought that the runic you can use the Elder Futhark or some of the other writing systems that I've talked about. And they go back as far as the Mycenaeans. And across time and across distance evolved uh, as as people, as humanity
Hmm.
basically rose up out of Africa and moved across the ancient world. The writing systems that people used evolved and changed. And so what eventually became the Elder Futhark started out as a writing system that may have been started by folks in the Mycenaeans and even prior to them.
Hmm.
So I look at the story of our world not so much as what is written down, but what was omitted, what's
Right.
missing,
Right.
and who chose to make that go missing, and whose
Hmm.
purpose did that serve.
Right.
So yeah.
You might be interested in Max Dashew's Suppressed Histories archives.
Oh, Max is a friend. I know
Okay.
Max.
She was on the
Yeah,
show last season. It was either last
yeah.
season or season before.
Actually, Max is the one you should probably ask that last question to. She is much more of a an expert in the history of the world. And I
Right.
do use Max's books in my classes as if folks take classes with me, I don't require any woman to have certain
Hmm.
books, but I will strongly, strongly suggest that Max's books be among those that they get to take classes with me in the rooms.
Right. She is just a
So
fountain of information.
fascinating and brilliant.
I don't know how she keeps
Just
it all in her head.
well, I don't think she does. If you ever get a chance to, her archives are voluminous.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, she's been doing it since the 70s.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Um, just out of curiosity, is there any connection between these writing systems of runes and the language of the Ogham?
So you have two distinctly different cultures. You have the runes, which came, the Elder Futhark, which were used primarily in the Scandinavian or Nordic countries.
Hmm.
And then you have the Ogham, which is specifically evolved out of the Celtic culture.
Okay.
And while, yes, there certainly is overlap between one and the other. The
Hmm.
Celtic countries we think of now as being Scotland, England, Cornwall, Wales, Ireland, Northern Ireland, France,
Hmm.
uh, and Brittany, that part of the world. And and so there was interaction between the folks that used the Ogham and held true to the Ogham and the folks who then emigrated or by force or by choice
Right.
in the Nordic countries and came down and lived in Great Britain. And so you can, I'll stand myself up as a good example. My people came to the mountains straight out of Great Britain. I am being coming from the Appalachian Mountains. My folks are a mix of the people that came over from Ireland, specifically in my family, Ireland and Scotland, and a bit English. And they settled in the Appalachian Mountains and married into the folk who had always lived there. And yet, those people that my family that were living in that came from Ireland and Scotland and England, they were actually of Nordic descent. So I'm like
Hmm.
100% Viking
Hmm.
from those Celtic countries. And so,
Right.
um, of course, there was a mix and overlap, and they stand alone as individual systems of
Right.
writing and also belief.
So, so for listeners who are unfamiliar with the Futhark runes, can you just like what's your when somebody asks you, well, what is that? What's your what's your elevator pitch? What's your short answer to that?
Well, the alphabet that we currently use for those of us who speak the English language is based on and analogous to the Elder Futhark. So the Elder Futhark is, hang on a minute, I just taught this class a few weeks ago, or God, not a few weeks ago. I ended up my last class in my beginnings runes series just yesterday. And so the Elder Futhark is made up of 24 runes, and it is not arranged in the same way as our alphabet, but I can tell you, utilizing our alphabet, if we go A, B, C, D, E, the runic correspondence to that is Onsus is A, and B is Berkana, and C is Kenaz, and D is Dagas, and E is Manas. And so even though they're not arranged in the same order, they translate letter for rune, pretty much. There are a few exceptions to that. The ancient folks did not have a specific rune for Y or Z. And so you can, the runes that are used for those letters are somewhat flexible, shall we say.
Right, right.
So what I is that we really don't know as English speakers very much at all about what we're saying. For instance, if you want to say the word no, the first letter is N, and that is the rune Naudis. And Naudis is portrayed by an upright stick with another stick crossing, and Naudis actually stands for the ancient way of making fire, rubbing two sticks together. And Naudi stands for need fire, that energy that you must bring up within yourself to accomplish a goal. And most of the time when we're saying no, we're bringing up that inner fire to say what we mean, and that is no. And then the letter O stands for Otala, the rune Otala, which stands for personal sovereignty. So when you say no, especially as a woman in this modern world, we're not supposed to say no, are we? But when we say no, we raise that fire and we stand in our personal sovereignty and we say no.
Right.
And then feel that. That's the energy.
I can also see that from an imagery standpoint, right? The image of the stick standing up straight and another stick over it is like a it's like this it's like this symbol with the circle with the line through it.
Sort of, yeah.
That's just that's where I went with that when you described what it was. I had another question in there, but it has gone the way of the wind. You know how that happens.
Of course, yes.
So today's episode is sponsored by New World Women.
If you are a woman light worker, change maker, creative, or spiritual entrepreneur who wants to affect change from the divine feminine principles and be in like-hearted community, then check out New World Women, a company created by women, for women, with women. Hi, I'm Dawn Morningstar, and yes, that's my given name, one of 3 co-founders of New World Women, a movement of diverse women standing together claiming our power and manifesting a world beyond patriarchy. Kelly, host of The Girlfriend God, is one of New World Women's founding mothers. So join with Kelly and women from around the world who know it's time for the energy of the goddess to reawaken in each of us. Check out the Women's Proclamation for a New World at bit.ly/NWWGFG. That's bit.ly, bit.ly/NWWGFG.
Radical feminism that taught me to take everything that I had ever been told, everything I had ever read, everything I had ever studied, and turn it upside down on its head and shake it out, and bring to those teachings a truly feminist perspective. And so I have brought that into. I'm a voracious reader. I did go to college for about 3 years and decided to quit college because it was too limiting, and it didn't allow me to study all the different things I was interested in. And so in my learning about the runes, I have read many, many books about the runes, and I've studied most of the major well-known scholars. And I have continued to bring my feminist analysis to what modern writers say that the runes mean and what the ancient writers say that the runes meant. And then also, because of my experience with horses, and horses in the ancient world were one of the most sacred animals.
Yeah.
And then also, the other part about me that you may or may not know is that I was the first woman in the state of Kentucky to sue my way into the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners. So I've been
I did not know that.
Well, I've been a woodworker all my life, actually. My dad gave me a buck knife, and I started whittling with it and making stuff when I was a child. So my other great love has been a study of trees, the science and the lore of trees. And you cannot really understand the runes unless you really also make a concurrent study of the science and the lore of trees. The runes themselves are created by observing the dendritic growth patterns of deciduous trees. Does that make sense? And deciduous trees, those trees that lose their leaves in the fall and come again in spring.
Right.
There are some trees that don't, and they are also part of the rune row. One of the most important parts of the trees of the rune row is actually the yew tree, specifically the English yew. We don't, the yew trees that we have here are mostly bushes, not trees. But that's a very important tree. And in the runes, the yew tree stands for, it is the tree of life. It is the tree of life and death, evergreen. So, so I have followed my own path of study of the runes in a very circuitous, sort of serpentine way, bringing bits of wisdom and knowledge, I hope, and bringing it all together to help create a bit of a whole, so to speak.
So when
Did I answer your question?
Yes. So when you look at how the runes were interpreted in ancient times versus how the runes are interpreted now, have they always been, aside from from you and people who work with you, have they always been interpreted through the male lens, even in ancient times?
Not in really ancient times.
Okay.
So in the Norwegian stories that have been written down, most of the stories that we have to read and look at now were written down 400 to 500 years after the Christianization of the Nordic countries. And they were written down by a monk named Snorri Sturluson. And bless his heart, Snorri, I feel deeply grateful for the things that he did write about. But of course, because he was a Christian monk, he had to put a Christian spin on it. So you don't
Right.
get the real clear story. I think what's more interesting is what was written about the Germanic countries and also about the Nordic countries by a Roman historian named Tacitus, that, you know, a good 1,000 years prior to Snorri. And Tacitus writes in his book Germanica about how well the women were considered to be wise, and and he talks about the priestesses who were the ones who went from village to village and cast lots out on a cat skin to help tell the future of the village. And so in the Nordic creation myth, there's a story about how a whole group of folks came from the east and conquered and invaded the Norse countries. And the people from away, they're called the Aesir. And they actually, the name Aesir means that they were people of the ash tree. And the ash tree is really important historically in that it is the tree that you want to use for a spear or shield or an arrow, because it will bend but not break, and it's
Right.
extremely strong and resilient. Those people are called the Aesir, or the Ace, and their gods are called the Aesir. And so one of the main god of the Aesir is Odin. And these were very warlike, aggressive folk. And so when they invaded, they found the people who were living there already, who were very peaceable and mostly farmers and fishermen and hunter gatherers. And those people worshipped a group of gods and goddesses called the Vanir. And so what happened was, and this is written in their stories, the Aesir came in and fought and won victory over the Vanir.
Right.
What was understood, though, is that in ancient times, they couldn't just make people stop worshiping those that they had always worshipped. And so there was a blend, so to speak.
Right.
So what I have found, again, in my readings of not just Snorri Sturluson, but in my readings about the Roman guy Tacitus, and then later on, between Snorri Sturluson and this Roman dude Tacitus, there's also this English poet, the Venerable Bede, who writes about how the Germanic folk and the Norse folk also celebrated their holidays. And so what becomes clear to me, especially right now, as this is being recorded, I know you're going to be showing it in maybe sometime in February or March, but as we're recording it, we're coming up to Yule. And Yule, instead of being the time of year when the male god was conceived and born, Yule actually in ancient times was a holiday specifically given to honoring our ancient female ancestors.
Right.
Our Disir, that was what they were called, the Disa or the Disir or the Edises.
Right.
But there's a whole lot, many stories about the attempted subjugation of the Vanir goddesses and gods by the
Right.
Aesir. And so it's most people think of it as a myth or a story. I think it's true. I think it's the handed down generation to generation oral story of their people.
Right.
Yeah. So
that they kind of then just mythologized, right?
yeah, yeah. And so most people now who utilize the elder Futhark and or the younger Futhark would call them who call themselves heathen are true to the Aesir gods, and most in particularly true to the head god Odin, who is the head patriarch. And I myself um, could care less about Odin. I don't wish to offend him, but I'm not interested in him at all. And I
Hmm.
myself am true to the Vanir, and particularly I am true to Freya. And I do also honor her brother Freyr, who and Frigga and Freyr um, are somewhat like the Greek goddess Artemis and her brother Apollo, in
Right.
that they are the divine twins. So Freyr in particular is a god of agriculture, and his job is to ensure the fertility of the land. So
Right. I'm very familiar with Freya because when I had my feet firmly planted on this goddess path, she was the first like patron deity that I had ever worked with.
mm,
Um, there have been several since then, but she was the first. And
mhm.
it really changed the course of what my path to being what I now call a monotheistic goddess worshiper, because there's no other word for it really. Um, but and she was really the one that set me on that
Yeah.
path.
So there's an understanding in the both in the Asa true faith or the Vanir true Bana true faith, which is basically general heathen, that one of when we're born, one of our female ancestors, not our male ancestor, but one of our female ancestors basically steps up to accompany us through our lifetime. And that one ancestor is called your Philia, Fylia. And so the Christians, again, Christianize that by saying, well, you have a guardian angel. But
Right.
it, but it's in truth, it was understood, and I believe it. I don't believe it. I know it's true that someone from way, way, way far back in your family lineage chose to step up and be your guide and your protector in many ways, all throughout this lifetime. And so, if you've ever been out or around and just felt like you weren't alone, but there was a beneficial presence with you, yeah,
Mhm.
it could have been, one of your close relatives, but it could also be your philia.
Right.
And and again, that word philia does have its roots in the name for the great goddess Freya. So yeah, so
One
uh,
of
they seek
one
us out.
right. One of the only kind of unknown official uh, goddess religions that I'm aware of is called uh, Philianism.
Really,
So
I've heard
yeah,
of it.
I actually, I'll be honest, until this moment, I always thought it was Philianism, which is probably an alternate pronunciation of that somewhere. Um, but yes, that's a whole other. I actually there. Okay, so if you're interested, there's an episode. I can't remember if it's last season or the season before about that,
Okay,
because they have uh, like a lot of witchcraft traditions. They have different ranks of priestesses, and there is some kind of hierarchy, and um, They have a liturgy, they have rituals that they do every day, and it evolved out of this tradition that two women from Oxford University created in the 70s.
Fascinating.
And their literature is a book that they claim to have channeled. So, yeah, it's
Okay,
good stuff.
okay, I'll be looking that up.
Okay. So over the years, how have you, like when you teach your classes and when you talk to people about the feminine perspective of the runes, what are some of the most significant things that you A, teach and B, have discovered? Or both?
Okay. Well, the first thing that I say is the name of the word rune actually translates as whisper, to whisper. It translates as meaning the sound that the wind makes when it blows through the leaves of the trees. That whispers of voices that you can just almost make out but not quite get. It means to whisper the mysteries of the world.
Because they
And
often imprinted the symbols on wood, right?
yes, yes.
Okay.
What's interesting is that there is not a single wooden artifact that survived with runes on them. There's not. There are also no stone, you can look on Etsy or Amazon and find sets of runes that were engraved into stones. The ancients didn't do that. But what they did do and is they carved huge standing stones. This is a replica of a stone that is still standing in Gotland, and it's actually, in truth, it's about 6 feet high. And so they used these stones. There are runes, there's a message written all around there. And so they used these stones to write as oftentimes as memorials to someone who had passed, oftentimes to honor someone, to make a land boundary or claim a piece of land,
Mhm.
or to leave a sign, basically say, go this way, not that way, kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so I, but the fact that they are not, that they haven't been able to find any wooden artifacts doesn't mean much, because wood doesn't last.
Right.
It would have rotted. But remind me what your question was again. I'm sorry.
What some of the most significant things that,
Yes.
either that you teach or that you've discovered along the way, or both?
So the fact that the runes mean to whisper, I'm going to say something now that may get us both in trouble, and if for the heathens, it's going to be like blasphemy. But the origin myth that is in the Havamal, and it talks about supposedly the god Odin brought the runes to the world.
Right.
And he says, I'm going to paraphrase this in one stanza in the Havamal, he says that I hung on that tree, that windy tree, 9 days and 9 nights, and neither drink nor food did they give me. But I saw the runes. I saw the runes, and I took them up screaming as I fell back. And I'm looking at that going, you're hanging on that world tree for 9 days and 9 nights, huh, dude? Yeah, you're getting formed. You're in your mother's womb. You are in the womb of the goddess. You opened your eyes and you saw the runic forms in the placenta of the goddess. Because if you look at a placenta and you look at a tree, it is the same. And ancient folks were not so uh, divided from their own bodily processes. I mean, I
Right.
bet there are very few people who have actually even seen a human placenta.
Right.
Maybe a few, I mean, home births are more common now, but in ancient times, that's all there were. Okay.
Right.
And so they would have noticed that correlation between the 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 great tree that we hang on as as infants forming in our mother's wombs and the great tree of life. And so what I say is that Odin didn't bring the runes to the world. He just happened to notice them as he was getting born. And
Love that.
as men always do, took all the damn credit.
Right.
But we, as the birth givers, as the life bringers, as the light bringers, we women are and contain the runes. The runes are in and of our own female blood mysteries.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going with it, and I'm going to tell everyone I know.
Well, and that is the core foundation of the way that I teach about the runes from a feminist female perspective. Yeah.
So, what other female perspectives do you bring to the runes? Are there particular runes that fall into this train of thought?
All of them.
All of them. Okay.
Because if you start with the first rune, Fehu, it is, I'm going to hold it up right here. The first rune in the rune row is Fehu. And it's this one right here, okay? Fehu. And it, in the modern translation, stands for mobile wealth. And most of the time in the modern books, it's said to be gold. Bullshit. Fehu, the first rune in the rune row, stands for mobile wealth in the form of the ancient reindeer herds that the people used to follow and migrate with. Modern people have this idea that humans herd the reindeer. Bullshit. Humans followed the reindeer in their natural migratory paths as they went from summer pastures to winter pastures. And
I really want to do an episode about the Sami tribes.
That's it. So the reindeer provided the people with everything they needed: food, shelter, and the more reindeer that one could, manage, brought the family even greater wealth.
Right.
So the original herds that people used to follow, the reindeer herds, and in particular, what's important about this is it was not the male reindeer that gave the people their wealth and benefit. It was the female reindeer. Just like
the herd isn't the herd usually led by a pregnant female?
The herd is always led by a female.
Right.
And oftentimes she's pregnant, but she would be the leading mother of the herd. And she would be assisted by her sister and or her daughters. And then once people, as times changed and people changed, the reindeer were somewhat replaced in the southern realms by cattle. And the folks used to follow the herds of cattle. And then again, humanity evolved and agriculture came in and people started staying in one place. But it was still understood that the more cattle you had, the more wealthy a person you were.
Right.
So
and the reindeer tribes often had the shamans of those tribes were often female.
Almost always. Not always, but almost always.
Right.
And if you're interested, if your readers are or listeners are interested in learning more about that, I would recommend them to Max Dashew's.
Okay.
The first one that she published, because she talks a lot more about this than I can.
She knows everything, so that's not surprising.
Right. So just start right there. It starts out with the female reindeer leading the herds and leading the humans and providing for health, wealth, and prosperity. And it goes on like that.
What's your favorite thing to talk about?
My favorite thing in the rune road to talk about? Oh my
Mm-hmm.
God, I couldn't even begin. The next rune after Fehu is Ulurus. I'm going to show you this one. And Ulurus,
Mm-hmm.
this one right here,
Mm-hmm.
Ulurus, it actually stands for the great cow, Audhumla, A-U-D, Audhumla. Anyway, I can't spell right now, but she is important in that from fire and ice, she licked the first world being into life. And the first being that was created in the world by Audhumla was a fellow, not a fellow, actually a sexless being. His name, her name is Emir. And it was from that body, the first body that Audhumla created, that then other bodies were created and humanity came into being. The whole world came into being. So you had the first two runes talking about the female, the power of the female, of the goddess. Audhumla, by the way, survives in our modern times by um, uh, if you want to talk about the Milky Way, the cluster of stars that we can look out and see, which we
Mm-hmm.
now know is the arm of the galaxy that we inhabit. But in ancient times, it was understood that trail of white was Audhumla's milk leaking out
Right.
of her teats as she galloped across the sky.
Right.
So, and it just
There's
goes on
so
like that.
yeah, there's so much. And that's
Yeah.
and that's just the stuff that we know or that we have some historical reference for.
Mhm.
I think there's even so much more that we don't know.
Of course.
Because what we do know has been so corrupted from the very beginning, right?
Yes. Yes.
And even in well, like you were saying, like the mythology that has risen about Odin was heavily written by and influenced by men from the very
Everything.
beginning. And in all mythologies throughout the world, we can
Yes.
find at least a few examples, if not a whole lot of examples of what I think of as kind of this secondary mythology where like in Greek and Roman culture, right? How many goddesses were either completely erased, or if they weren't erased, they were definitely demoted, right? They were married off to somebody, or they became somebody's consort, or they were reduced to some young virginal status. And but we know
Mm-hmm.
prior to that wasn't the case. That wasn't the story we told.
That's right.
We
Yep.
we told the story of woman first, and then it was rewritten by men.
Yeah. Yeah. The Scandinavian folk believed or understood that the first man stepped forward out of an ash tree, but the first woman stepped forward out of a mountain ash, which is a rowan tree, which has white blossoms and red berries.
Hmm.
And the rowan tree is known not to seek the company of other trees necessarily, but to seek her own company, to stand
Hmm.
independent and sovereign. And so you can find a rowan growing almost at tree line in the hills of Scotland. And the
Right.
same is in West Virginia. You're not going to find a rowan in the deep forest. You're going to find her growing where she damn well pleases in the most
Right.
you can think of. And yet, as in her aspect as being the mother of humanity, she also feeds all the creatures and is uh, in the ancient lore, tree lore. If you want to have something in your pocket to give you protection, get yourself just a little tiny even piece, even just a twig of rowan, and carry it in your pocket. People used to put rowan trees across the threshold of their houses The oak would be the front door because it's also guardian, but the threshold of the house that you would have to step over would be rowan. And if you were not, if you were a person of ill will, that rowan would reach up and grab your foot and make you trip. So I'm sorry.
That's awesome. Um,
But what I wanted to say though is I could go right down through every single one of the runes and give you the female, feminine interpretation of it.
And that's what your class is, right?
Class is, yes.
So to the listeners, you'll have to take the class.
Yeah, I give a beginning class, and then I have a secondary class, and I'm getting ready to putting together the materials for those students who've taken the first and second class to also take a third class on the meaning of the runes. Because once you understand the runes, and what they're the concept of the mysteries contained within the runes, then I also, because I'm also a witch, I also teach my folk how to utilize the folk magic traditions that have survived in again a more feminist way.
Right. Do you think that you could, if you wanted to, develop, I'm guessing the answer is yes, that you could develop a similar framework around the OM?
I have to be honest and say I have not made a study of the OM. It has not called to me nor spoke to me, and so I'm guessing that because it is purely based upon the tree and tree lore, that might be so as well.
Right.
But I can't honestly say that I know.
I was just curious.
Oh.
Well, we're about at the top of the hour. Anything you want to make sure the listeners know before we move on to your 3 questions? I ask all the new guests the same 3 questions at the end of every episode.
I think the one thing I want to make sure that your folks know is that, again, I know this is going to be shown way after Yule, but I want you to know that Yule started as an ancient holiday to honor your female ancestors. And I'm not talking about your mom or your grandmother. I'm talking about those women. Thousands and thousands of women had to give birth in order that you, dear listener, are able to sit here and partake of this podcast. And so I would ask that that we begin to consider the lives of those women and what they must have gone through so that we can have the life that we have, and give them honor if you can, both at the holidays. In the Nordic countries, there's also a holiday called Winter Nights, and that would have been celebrated about the second week of October when the harvest comes to an end, and that's another time to thank your holy female ancestors. And not to ignore your male ancestors, I don't mean that. Begin to honor your female ancestors.
Yeah.
So what's my 3 questions?
Okay. So question number 1 is, tell me something about yourself that people would be surprised to learn. It's usually something quirky. Like mine is, I like to take black and white photography with an analog camera in cemeteries.
Okay. Well, I do like to walk in cemeteries. I find them peaceful, and I always stop and talk to people, whether I can see them or not. one of the things that people might find surprising about me or not, those who know me, is that I have second sight. I was born with second sight. My mother had it, her mother had it, and her mother before her had it. And that's as far back as we can know. And second sight is a talent that is in the culture that I grew up in is quite accepted and not thought as weird or unusual.
Right.
It wasn't until I moved away from the Appalachian Mountains that I discovered that it was something that people out of that area thought was odd. So I have second
Okay.
sight.
Well, that certainly counts.
Yeah.
So the second question is, what is your current favorite television series? And if you don't watch a lot of television, what are you currently reading?
Hmm.
Or you can answer both.
Yeah. So I don't watch a lot of TV.
Mhm.
I really love YouTube. And there's a series on YouTube called Time Team, and it's all about archaeological digs in Great Britain, Ireland, and Northern Ireland. And I just really love history and archaeology.
Mhm.
In fact, I once entertained the idea of studying to be an archaeologist,
Mhm.
right up until I went on a field dig and had to dig up people's bones, and I said, "Oh no, this is not for me. I will not disturb these folks' rest."
Mhm.
So that I
Okay.
highly recommend Time Team on YouTube.
Okay.
And what am I reading currently? Let's see. Somebody took my book. I'm reading. Hang on. Oh, I'm reading a wonderful book by Etane Massey, and it's called The Turning of the Year: Lore and Legends of the Irish Seasons.
Okay. Cool.
It is. It's quite wonderful.
And finally, if your life were a movie, what would be the theme song on the soundtrack?
Steppenwolf, Born to Be Wild. And if you all
That's
don't know
awesome.
that song, you look it up.
Yep. Yep. Well, yeah, there's probably a lot of people that listen to this that are completely unfamiliar with that song, but maybe not. I don't know. My analytics say that my average audience, I think, is between like 35 and 43. So,
Well, I'm 72, so I'm out there a little bit.
yeah, but I'm 52 and I know the song. So, it's a classic,
Yes, it is.
right?
I'm a classic.
You are. All of you, everybody that comes on this show. Okay. Well, I think I have run out of final questions. Sometimes at the last moment after the three questions, I go, "Oh, wait a minute, I forgot to ask you about," uh, but that's not happening this time. So I will be in touch. I will let you know what your release date is, but until then, I wish you the peace and the love of the goddess.
Blessed be.
Blessed be. Okay. Take care. Have a great day.
All right.
Thanks for watching or listening to The Girlfriend God. Don't forget to like, rate, review, subscribe, follow, and comment. Episodes drop every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. and you can follow The Girlfriend God on social media on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.